Hello guys and welcome to the Darubini la Uchaguzi podcast from Election Observation Group. Good afternoon from where we are, good morning from where you are, good afternoon as well. My name is Imelda Carrera. I'll be the host today, and with me I am privileged to have the National Coordinator for Election Observation Group, Mule Musau, who will introduce himself and tell us more about Election Observation Group. Mule, karibu sana to our podcast. So today I want us to talk about 1 year after elections in Kenya. So I want you to take us through the history. You have been in the election platform for such a long time. You have been in the era of Moi. You have been Mlolongo. We have also moved to other ways of doing elections. So I want you to take us through the history before we go to the 2022 elections. So karibu sana.
Thank you very much. Well, I don't need to introduce myself because you've already introduced me. My name is Mule, as you've stated. I've been involved in the electoral process for, I think, nearly 2 decades. I think, it should be around 17 years. I think all the way from 1996, well, quite some time. I think it's much more than even 20 years that we've been involved in electoral processes. And it's been a very interesting journey. When I first became aware of electoral processes, we had one of the most famous electoral processes, which is called the Mlolongo system, in 1988.
The one that we used to queue from here to Timbuktu.
Yes, so people queued behind their favorite candidate. The very interesting aspect about those elections, and not under the Kanu regime, is that the shortest lines always won. So it was not an election where we were saying the majority rules. It was very clear what the majority was, but because the election officials were people who belonged to the state, then they made sure that their favorite candidates, especially for the incumbent or for the system, were the ones who were winning the elections. So it's also a very interesting election because I think that was the last election in which we were conducting elections under the governmental model of an election commission.
So allow me to cut you short. So part of our audience, we like to call them the Generation Z, the ones that do not understand some of these political and election terms. So would you mind clarifying or explaining what the governmental, what it is all about?
First, let me even take them a little bit further back. One is that Kenya has been a democratic country ever since the colonial days. There were elections which used to be conducted by the colonialists. And it was not until 1961 that elections featured African representatives. And by 1963, when we got independence, now Africans were able to participate fully in the election processes. So we've been having elections before. Now, elections is the means through which people choose, in a democratic country, is the means through which people choose their candidates or representatives who go to parliament to represent them. It is through elections that you're able to choose a president of the country to lead the country. And therefore there must be a mechanism through which that election is going to be conducted. So in respect to the framework of how elections are conducted, is that there is an agency which is set up. And this agency is the one which organizes, which manages, and which delivers on elections. And that is what we call an election management body or an election management organ. There are three main models. We have what we call a governmental model. This is a model where a ministry in most likely either in the Attorney General's office, like it was in Kenya. It was, there was an individual in the Attorney General's office who was the one who was the Chebukati of those days, or the chair of the commission. In other countries, it could be the Ministry of Justice, if there's such a ministry, which is in charge of elections. So we call those governmental models because they are located within the government. You do not go out there and come up with a new commission. We currently are having a discussion about appointment of a commission, which basically is a process which is led from outside the government. So in the governmental model, the ministry, an official is chosen and told to conduct the elections.
So we have very many people who do not understand how the election management body is instituted. Would you explain to us how the Chebukatis and his other commissioners come into place?
I'll come to that, but let me finish with the model, so that once we are very clear the model, we can come with how they are constituted.
So you've done the
So we've done the governmental model. The second one is what we call the independent model. The independent model is a commission which is formed outside the government, such as ours. So we appoint new people, commissioners, who come from outside government. They form the commission, they appoint a secretariat, and they run elections on behalf of the people. Of course, there's going to be a governmental process because Parliament, which is part of government, will have to vet these individuals. Yes. The president will also have to have a role in the appointment of those individuals. But it is a process which is different people, based on how we like them, how we can trust them, and based on the criteria and the laws that you have set in the country, that we choose to be able to conduct. And that's an independent model. The third model is a mixed one. So between the two, we have a governmental one and we have the independent. So we have a mixed one. Usually, where we have the commission itself, in our case, the Chebukati 7, are coming from outside, but the Marjans, or the CEO and the secretariat who work at Anniversary Towers, are government officials directly. So basically you're saying it's like ministry officials are seconded to conduct the technical work of the elections. But the commission comes from outside. So that model is what we call a mixed model. The idea is the independent commission oversights the governmental secretariat. So the secretariat is governmental. In the independent model, everybody is coming from outside. It is a commission which is appointed, which appoints the secretariat. So it is their own, and therefore belongs to them, and therefore as new as the commission itself. In the governmental model, everybody comes from the government. So we have somebody in charge, and we have a secretariat which is all tasked with the work of running the elections, but there are some people who are in charge of it, who could be called commissioners or could be called chief officers, whatever name the government will give them. So those are the three models. In terms of how they constitute them, again, you'll go to the models. The governmental one is easy to explain because it is just a ministry, it's a department. So those are already appointed, they are already there, and therefore they just are given TORs, terms of references. You run this election and deliver on it. The independent one is the one which is usually much more testy in terms of the process. And such is the kind of issues we're even dealing with right now. Because you have to come up with the criteria. Constitution in Kenya comes up as a very clear criteria on who becomes a member of a commission. Guided by the principles of the Constitution, the issue of 2/3, making sure that all appointed and elected commission positions adhere to the 2/3 gender rule. They need to have the face of Kenya. The chair needs to have some legal background, and they should not be more than 7 in number. So there's guidelines. Each law, every country has a certain law which guides the numbers. And then we go through a process in which we have a select panel. The select panel, because this is an open these are open positions for all Kenyans. Any Kenyan who feels qualified to be able to participate in the process, then there will be a select panel whose task, it's a temporary panel, whose task, when there is a vacancy in the commission, is to invite applications. They vet those applications, they make shortlists of the names which are required, which qualify based on the criteria, and then they submit those shortlisted names to Parliament for further vetting and further approvals. And then the Parliament now finally, once it is okay, the names, it sends the names to the President for assent, or to, the President can also say, I'm not comfortable with these people, and then send them back with his own comments. So that's the process of appointing an independent model. The only difference with the mixed one is that the mixed one on the Secretariat side, you don't need to appoint them because, and I've not spoken about the Secretariat. So once you appoint this commission, the 7 commissioners, then they go on and appoint a Secretariat. So they can either decide to go on with the other secretary which was they found in office, or they can appoint their own. Any person who needs to be appointed, the commission will have to be appointed by the commissioners. They are the appointing authorities. For the mixed model, you don't appoint, the government appoints a Secretariat, and then the other independent commission itself follows the same route that we have used in the independent model. Basically, names are sought out there, they are shortlisted, they are vetted, they are interviewed, and then the shortlists are handed over to the authorities for appointment. So that is the process of appointing a commission. And I was saying that in 1988 is the last time we had the governmental model. Since 1992, we started having the Election Commission of Kenya, which became a different animal altogether in terms of, but it was still not very many experts and commentators do not believe it was independent to the extent that it was it could be able to undertake its activities without the interference of the government. The idea behind independence is that, and you'll find this in mostly third world countries, or countries where people don't trust their government. We do not want the government to interfere with our elections, because the government is a player. Remember, the president stands for election. Members of parliament stand for election. The ones who are on the ruling side, they're also standing for elections, and sometimes they hold very powerful positions. So you do not want them to interfere with the process, otherwise they'll create biases. So that's the reason why we say it needs to be independent. The ECK, the Electoral Commission of Kenya, which came after the governmental model, was not viewed by very many people as independent. It never had the framework, the legal framework that allows it to be independent. And that's why after the 2007 post-election violence, and then the evaluation which was done by Justice Johan Kriegler, they came up with recommendations that say we need to disband the Election Commission of Kenya and come up with a much more independent model of a commission. And that's why the interim independent and boundaries commission came up, and later on it became IEBC, which is the Independent Election and Boundaries Commission. So so there's that's the model we've been using up to now, the independent model. But of course there are still discussions about how free or independent that model still is. So we still have the die still cast out there in terms of whether people feel it is independent enough.
Can we cut?
Time has wet.
So, Mule, before we proceed to the 2022 Kenya elections, we have always had a problem with the commission. We moved from the ECK, you told us about the IBC, and then now the IEBC. Is the problem the commission or the formation of the people? What exactly is the problem? Because I'm assuming if we do away again with the IEBC, we'll have another management body that most probably will have the same problems. So according to you as an election expert, what is exactly the problem?
First, just a correction. It was the first commission. It came after the Election Commission of Kenya. ECK was the Interim Independent Election Commission, IIEC. And because the Boundaries Commission was a separate commission. We had a different commission which was dealing with boundaries, and one which was dealing with elections. But later on, after the 2011 electoral laws and the new constitution, we all put all those laws in one. Those commissions in one, and we had what now we are calling the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission. So boundaries were added to the commission as one of their responsibilities. Now, the question about elections in Kenya and why we do not seem to be finding a solution to the question of how we run elections stems from the fact that Kenyans have never been comfortable. First, we've never had very good elections since independence. Very few of the elections which were conducted, apart from the analysts will tell you that apart from the 1963 elections and the 2002 Kibaki elections, people do not feel that the other elections were going according to plan. And therefore it's a history of people feeling let down in terms of elections. I've just given the case of the 1988 when we had the Mlolongo system, where it was blatant rigging. The short lines were of candidates who were getting the fewer numbers were the ones who were actually winning. And that was a physical, everybody could do a physical count of the people on the line. But still, the ones that the system wanted to win are the ones who won. So there's been this backlog of mistrust of how elections are conducted in Kenya. So that's number one. So that's the first problem that we have. That we have this history where people feel cheated for a very long time, they learn never ever to trust. As they say when a bird does what? There's this saying about a bird that a bird learns to fly without stopping when something happens. I'll remember when there's something about it being attacked, and then it says when they learn that these guys are also doing this, then they also decide they will always also fly without stopping. So you learn from that process. So Kenyans basically have learned from the process of they feel the authorities, whether they are governmental authorities, whether they are independent authorities, they don't feel comfortable with the way the conduct and the management of electoral processes is done. And that's the reason why even ourselves at the Elections Observation Group have always said that the first issue that we need to sort out in terms of our elections is the mistrust or the trust deficit that we have on elections. And the trust deficit in this country does not just extend to elections alone. We have a problem with nearly all systems. The very word called serikali, you know where it comes from. It comes from sirikali. So people believe that governments were always designed to hide things. Sirikali. So when you start thinking it from that foundational conception of what government is, then you start routing whether all these ministries, all these authorities, all these agencies, whether they actually do everything very clearly, very in a manner in which they're supposed to be doing them, or there is something always afoot. They're always changing the citizen one way or the other. So those are the issues that we may need to unpack when it comes to the issues about elections. Granted, of course we cannot continue complaining forever. We must find ways in which these issues can be solved. And I think one of the things that we've tried to recommend over the years is that whatever the election management, everything about the election management process needs to be very transparent. And Article 86 actually anchors the principles that we should be able to use for purposes of elections. Article 86 says that whatever method we ever use in elections, it needs to be simple, that's the first qualification, secure, transparent, accountable, and verifiable. Those are the principles of elections here. So when they say it needs to be simple, that's a big issue and transparent, we're saying, can we have an election that we all understand? Then we'll not be thinking there's something that people are doing behind our backs. So there's a need for whoever is conducting elections in this country to try to be as transparent as possible, to try to do those elections in a very simple, within a very simple process. One of the surveys that we've done recently, if you've cared to read it, on the citizen assessment, on voter registration, the citizens are saying it's a complex process. When you say it's a complex process, you've already violated the principle of simplicity.
Yes.
So those are the issues. So if people feel voter registration is complex, then they will just say, I don't know whether I'm in that voter register or not. I don't know how many other people are in that register. I don't know whether the people who are voting are bona fide or bona fide voters in our register, in our voters' roll. So those are already doubts which are created. And because we also have another phenomena that is called very close elections, then because of that closeness between the victor and the one who loses, then you can always cast aspersions about the entire exercise. You can always say, you know what, the voter registration was a complex one. They never gave us adequate education. The appointment of the officials was not done in a very transparent way. The way they declare their results was not transparent. So you can always have something to look forward to, and therefore you'll create doubts. The last issue, which is still related to the issue of trust and the issue of why we don't trust, we have had problems with the electoral bodies, is the question of the system that we are using. So what we have is a system called the first past the post. First past the post means exactly that. When you're in a race, there's a line you put, there's a string which is put at the end of 100 meters. The first person to get there becomes the winner. You can use the analogy of a post, that the first person who gets into beyond that particular post is the one who wins the election. That's the system we use. It's called first past that post. The one who gets to that post first is the winner. The one who doesn't get there first loses. Now that system, as opposed to other systems that I'll talk about, makes the loser not important. Because everybody is thinking about the winner. And by the way, the funny thing about our country is that we have also celebrated such kind of things all over in other spheres, even in education. Number one, upper number one. We celebrate them on TVs. We do these, all these other things. So basically, that sets the mood in the country that the most important person is number one. Even the person who gets a B in academics, nobody thinks about them, and they feel distraught. They feel that they are not even recognized. So they feel as they are second-class citizens. And in election, it's even much more worse, because the number one, or the one who goes past that post, gets everything. We have a system called winner take all. If you become the president in the country, you set the cabinet. You appoint all leaders, all the top directors of parastatals. You know, you are the one who determines how money moves around in the different counties and in the different spaces in the country. You know, so the whole power belongs to one person, or to the people of one, the ruling party. That's why those, after independence, that's why the independent parties such as KANU were very powerful. They could hire and fire. They could tell you to even sell your chicken. I don't think you people grew in the time where the chief could tell everybody, I will want every household to give 2 chicks for the purpose of this Harambee. And that was an order which was coming all the way from the State House. Says we have to fundraise and every household has to make a contribution. And the chief would come and give orders for anything to be taken, even goats to be taken from households. That was what we call an imperial presidency, where the president just determines everything across the country. So that's a system we've been having. Because of such kind of a system, people will fight tooth and nail to win.
Are you trying to say there's a problem with that system?
Of course, there's a big problem with the system. We need to change that system in the first place. We have tried to make some small changes here and there. one change that we've made is that we realized that since it was the purely first past the post system was the person who gets that poll wins, and it does not matter by how many. So we changed that a bit and said we need anybody who is going to go past that post to have gotten 50 plus 1. 50 plus 1 is what we call a majoritarian system of elections, where you win by majority. So 50 plus 1 means you get 50, you have 10 million voters who have voted, get 50% kwanza.
50% of the 10 million.
Of the 10 million, which is 5 million.
Yes.
And at least one extra vote. Which
one
makes
person.
One person. You don't need 20. Just need 1. 50 plus 1 means 50% plus 1 vote. Because that basically means you have the majority.
Yes.
And whoever is on the other side has a minority. So, but now the problem, of course, the problem with that for our case is that we have always hovered around now the 50%.
Yes.
We are always plus something very small or minus something very small. And because of that, then the people contest. That's the reason they say, well, you can't beat me 200,000 votes. 200,000 votes are very few. But the truth of the matter is that if somebody actually won with just one vote, they have become, they lead the country. They have won the election. That's very fair. But the idea was get first, because during the Kanu days, Moi, the former president of Kenya, used to win by 36% or 30%. And why was it winning 30%? Because if there are 4 candidates, he has gotten 35% and the others have gotten 20, 20, 20, 25. So he wins, but he has not garnered half of the country. So that used to be, it was seen to be, it was not giving him legitimacy.
Yes.
Because if 30% of the people are the ones who have voted for the president, what happened to the 70% who are opposing you? That makes you lack public legitimacy or the legitimacy of the majority. So that's very dangerous in a country, because it means if all 70% united, they can run you out of town. So the idea was somebody must get 50 plus 1. So the first amendment, that's the first change we made. The other change that we made is that we have allowed what you call some element of proportional representation. Proportional representation is where you say, based on the numbers you've gotten, we will nominate, we'll get a percentage, which will be prorated according to what numbers you have, the strength of your elect. If the people vote for Party A, for instance, 70% of the members of parliament are from Party A, 20% come from Party B, and 10% come from Party C. Then using that ratio, you can also appoint other people. You can appoint, for instance, you can nominate members of parliament with the 70%. If you have 10 slots, then the Party A will pick 7 out of 10, Party B will take 2 out of 10, and the other one will take 1. So that allows you to even get other members who are not elected, but also come into this process. So that creates an inclusion. And that's why we now even further extended it by saying we're going to have women being, we'll have counties electing a women representative. So that was a further affirmative action. So we have added some levels of affirmative action, some inclusion, and also added the issue of majoritarian system, where somebody has to garner more than 50% of the election, of the electoral vote to become the president. So that was the idea of trying to move from the pure first past the post system, where somebody just needed to win and then they become the president. But now what we are still having, the problem we're still having with that system, so that I can wind up on that issue about the first issue, is that we still have what you call a winner-take-all mentality. So whoever is still winning even now is still creating and having much more power. And the one who loses out, like the way even the way our structure, the structure of our elections currently, is that someone like Raila Odinga, despite getting nearly the same number of votes as Ruto, he is not even in government. He does not have an office. He has no say, really. He's a villager. So that creates problems, because from a power point of view, this is a very popular person. How then do you accommodate his views? because his views are respected by nearly half of the country. How do you accommodate him in the governance structure of the country? So there are still discussions about how you can be able to move the system to be more inclusive. We are still having a problem with the number of women in parliament, despite the affirmative action and other steps that we've taken. So again, for inclusion, because inclusion is a core principle of elections, you must try to reach out to as many groups as possible. So when women feel not represented, and especially because there is a constitutional requirement that they are supposed to get 2/3 of the appointive and elected positions, then you must come up with a further affirmative action that allows them to actually get in. So there are these conversations that we need to be having right now moving forward about how do we include more groups, how do we have even members of the opposition participate much more effectively in the governance of the country. This is a conversation about further changes to the electoral system that would make it much more inclusive and much more participatory.
Okay, so due to time, I understand that ILOC has done a comprehensive observation report that is titled From the Portal to the Ballot. So I'd like you to summarize and tell us the key challenges, the key highlights, some of the conclusions and recommendations you made. You can do one of each.
To make it very easy, I'll just use the thematic areas that we have, the 8 thematic areas. Some of the things that we were saying as far as there are some things which are cross-cutting, like the need for transparency and the need for stakeholder engagement, cross-cuts across all the 8 themes. But on voter education, our prayers have been that we need to see a much more robust engagement with voters. There are funding problems with voter education because IBC gets money very late in the day. We want to see a situation where voter education can also be introduced into the learning institutions, especially the basic education levels, because that allows us to have a longer engagement. And because voter education is a continuous process, then we need to see it going throughout the cycle. On voter registration, we faulted the commission for not giving us access to the voters register because we needed to get to audit that register. We believe that register still has a lot of problems and that needs to be cleaned. But more importantly is that voter registration process, it's one of the areas, as I alluded earlier, even based on the citizen assessment report, that people are saying is still a very complicated process. Again, it's a continuous process. What we need to see is that the commission needs to have fast enough funding that allows it to be able to run voter registration throughout the electoral cycle, but we also need a targeted engagement that allows the commission to be able to target some of the marginalized communities, some of the fringe communities in the country, so they can be able to be part of the register. Remember, our last registration realized 22.1 million voters when we had a total of 26 million eligible voters. So about 4 million voters were not able to get into the register. So we need to be a very robust engagement. On political parties, we have a lot of problems when it comes to the nomination processes of the political parties. We still not, despite the fact that we saw some improvements in the last election process, there is still a lot of issues which must be addressed, such as inclusion. Very many, the shambolic nature of how nomination certificates are given to candidates, some of them who have not even won. The issue of negotiated democracy, where people, especially young people and women, also feel left out because these are elders who meet somewhere and decide who the candidates are going to be. So we need also some cleaning up, and especially the EDR processes, where very many people complain that they did not get justice. So on political parties, that's a big issue that we'll be looking at. On the question to do with the media, we have been doing reports on disinformation and misinformation for a very long time now. While the traditional media has made some great improvement in becoming much more responsible, the new problem, and which you have cited, is social media. And we need those platforms to be well regulated, because if you want an election to be free and fair, then the environment must also be able to produce information that can be trusted by the people or can be informed, can empower the people. But where there is misinformation, fake news, and all the other things, that becomes a problem. On violence and security, our biggest issue is that the hotspots still remain. We still have problems in terms of violent activities, intimidation, especially to the special interest groups, women, PWDs, and therefore we really, and we were very happy actually with the police for coming up with a very good strategy very early in the day, and that's why we say the 2022 elections actually was one of the more peaceful elections over the last few years that we've been having elections. So part of that was because the police got involved very early, so kudos to them, but we got to see much more action, especially in terms of stakeholder engagement and early warning systems which have been set up to forestall any violence that may be happening around elections. Special interest groups, I think we've talked about because of the mainstream issue. The women participation in this electoral process, the PWDs, enabling, in this day and age, in the last election, we were still able to spot a few places where, which were not friendly to the PWDs. We still don't have Braille as one of the methods that can be used by voters who require that particular facility. So we still have gaps as far as ensuring that SIGs are fully involved in electoral processes. And finally, on the question of the EMB, the Election Management Body, which I've talked about very extensively. First, we'd like to see an EMB, an orderly process of appointing the EMB, and in time. You're going to be having commissioners coming very late in the day. The last two elections, this is the phenomenon, and we've had problems because you've had half of the commission coming very late in the day, and they come, they don't even know what is going on. They come, they look like they come with written scripts from the powers that be. So we need to see an appointment process which is done in a very transparent way, early in the electoral calendar, and then once they are in office, one of the things that ELOG has asked the Commission to try to do is that they need to be people-friendly. They need to reach out to the people. They need to be seen to be working for the people. They need to anchor all their activities with the people. And one of the ways of doing that, if they do that, they'll actually be able to subscribe to the Article 86 principle of simplicity, because they'll be reaching out to the people. They make the people understand the electoral process. So we need them to reach out, have much more robust stakeholder engagements, much more cordiality, so that even instances like the one that Elo complained about not accessing the voter register are things of the past. This is in this day and age, and I saw Chebukati actually tweeting yesterday or the day before, when he was saying that the reason why we are having coup d'etats in the Western African region is because those countries do not allow observers to do their job. So now he realizes that it's very important, because you're seeing what Elo can be able to do. Maybe if you went now to him again to ask him about the voter register, he would say, oh guys, get it. Maybe you've seen the light. The idea is cordiality, engagement, robust engagement with different stakeholders, engage with the media, make yourself visible, and especially the key stakeholder, the citizen, have engagements, robust engagements with them at their level, at the local level, so that people believe that then these elections are being conducted well. I think one of the other last recommendations that we've made along the side of the EMB and something on the management of election processes themselves is that we've also asked for staggering of elections. Because we feel that elections being conducted, 6 elections being conducted in one day is too much. And that also speaks to the question of the cost of elections, because that's another big problem that we still have. Kenya runs one of the most expensive elections in the world. At 2,000 or so shillings per person, or is it 100? How many dollars? $20.
Last I checked it was $25.
Yeah, so now it's around $20 per person. So marginal, reduction, but still we are still among the most expensive, considering that others go up with around $2, $3, $5. That's very expensive. So we still need to do a lot in terms of the cost of elections. There's staggered elections. The county elections can be held one day, the national election can be held another day. and then we try to see whether management of such processes becomes cheaper, becomes much more efficient, and becomes much more friendlier to the people.
Thank you very much, Mule. So I'm going to take some questions from the online team. So we have James who is asking how can he get the observation reports and what's the title of the observation reports?
Observation report is publicly available through our website www.ellog.or.ke, and also through our social media handles you can be able to get. The report is titled From the Ballot to the Portal, the Election Observation Report for the 2022 elections.
So James, you can access it from the website. We also have Alice who is asking what is your take on the bipartisan conversations, and do you think they will yield any results, and if we will go back to the streets?
The question of whether people want to go back to the streets is a political question they can answer for themselves. The idea for us is that we are part of the conversations that we want to see. ELOG recommended, both in 2017 and in 2022, ELOG reckoned that there are political problems in the elections, and political problems require political solutions. So a dialogue process is part of that process. So we have no problem with the dialogue. Any dialogue is welcome, so long as it is constructive, so long as it is engaging, and from where we also sit, so long as it is consultative with other stakeholders. ELOG has produced reports. We have other stakeholders who worked in the elections. Today I met the team at Bomas and I gave each of them copies of the ELOG report, because I told them even before you get a memorandum, we'll give them a memorandum because they have requested for a memorandum through Parliament. But now they have copies so they can go over the weekend and go through the process of looking at what we have been able to recommend. And there are other observers, including international observers, who have given recommendations. So it is important for them to consult as widely as possible, especially if they are going to solve the issues around elections in the country, because they form part of the agenda that the National Dialogue Committee is dealing with.
Okay, we also have Alice asking about the cost of elections, but I think that is a topic we are going to discuss in the upcoming podcasts. So thank you very much, Mule, for your time. Guys, follow us on our social media pages. Also share to your friend. Let us work on achieving credible, peaceful, free and fair elections. Asanteni sana na cheers to the country.